So we are live from Santa Clara, Cuba. Just behind me, people are beginning to wait for something quite historic. This is going to be the first commercial flight from the United States in over 50 years. Of course, the U.S. embargo prohibited this kind of travel up until today. It's been 55 years since you've had commercial air service between Cuba and the United States. JetBlue will fly the first flight. It's just leaving from Fort Lauderdale and will land in about an hour here in Santa Clara, Cuba. It's so close and yet so far away. Up until now, Americans have had to go through third countries or go on charter services, which were very expensive. There were not a lot of them, so you had to wait for months sometimes to get a ticket. They're very inefficiently run. You would wait for hours to get on the plane. So this is really going to change a lot about how people travel to Cuba, and it is going to also change how many Americans come to Cuba, because we expect, starting now, even though there are still travel restrictions on Americans coming to Cuba, that many more Americans will come on these flights. Now that it is easier, you can book directly online with JetBlue, American Airlines, soon Delta, and others. And so that is going to mean more American tourists coming here. There are not enough hotel rooms. There are not enough. Rental cars. It is really a bit of an issue. The infrastructure here, Cuba is aging infrastructure, but that is something Cuba is going to have to deal with. And we are going to see live pictures of this plane landing in just about an hour, and it will really be a historic day when the JetBlue flight lands here in Santa Clara, Cuba. A lot of executives on board, a lot of press on board to record this historic event when the first U.S. commercial flight lands here in Cuba in over a half century. We expect as well by the end of this year there'll be direct flights from Havana. There'll be 20 direct flights to Havana from the U.S., and there'll be up to 110 total flights to Cuba every day. That's the number that Cuba and the U.S. have agreed on. I'm Patrick Ottman in Santa Clara, Cuba. First question we have now. What's the price to fly there on JetBlue? It's about $200, $210. That's less than half the price if you've flown their charter services. So that means more people will come. Now that it's cheaper to come, you'll be able to book right on the website. Before you had to call numbers, send emails. It could take weeks to coordinate a flight to Cuba. Now you could book it in a matter of minutes, and it's a pretty inexpensive price, and that's because the airlines are really competing to get in to Cuba. This is a brand new market for American Airlines, and JetBlue, American, and others are going to have probably pretty low prices for a while. $200 is not a lot, and that will certainly drive more Americans to considering coming to Cuba. Not for a vacation spot, because tourism is still illegal under U.S. Restrictions, then as an educational tour, for some of the other reasons like religious activities. Really, anybody doing some research can figure out how to Cuba. People are coming here for tourism, even if they're not supposed to, and certainly those cheaper prices are going to inspire a lot of people to decide now is the time to Cuba. Next question: what's the climate there? Are people feeling excited about all the tourism? Listen, Cuba is in really dire economic straits. They need tourism. They rely on tourism, and it's more and more key now that the Soviet Union collapsed, of course, 20 years ago. Now that was their main benefactor. Venezuela, which sends a lot of assistance to Cuba, is having its own economic problems, so they're increasingly looking towards tourism and the United States to make up the difference. And we are seeing hotels being built. We are seeing the U.S. airlines being welcomed here in a way that would have been completely unexpected just a few years ago. And it's really a change. Of course, Cuba does not have great relations with the United States. They only restored relations last year with the U.S., but things are slowly changing because of necessity, and we expect to see many more Americans here soon. Going to the next question. Are flights only going to the capital? Absolutely not. I'm in Santa Clara, about 3 hours from the capital of Havana. There are a lot of Cubans with families here. You can go to the Keys, some of the nicest beaches in Cuba, only about an hour away from here. By the end of the year, though, we expect 110 flights, 90 of those to go to cities outside of Havana. There'll be about 20 daily to Havana. What's security like at the airport there? There have been some concerns in the United States if Cuban security is up to the test of having flights, direct commercial service to the U.S. and the Cuban government, not surprisingly, says yes. Security when I travel to and from Cuba, I've lived here for 4 years, is very, very tight. They check every bag, they pat you down, now they make you take your shoes off and check liquids, so they are very, very security conscious. Funny question, what kind of Pokemon are there now here? What kind of Pokemon are there in Cuba? I've never seen one. Internet is very, very restricted. I suppose someday soon we will have that in Cuba. As far as I understand, because we are a little behind on social media and other types of gaming here because of the limited internet, that it does not exist in Cuba. Why is it so historic? This hasn't happened in 55 years. Right after the Cuban Revolution, they cut off flights between Cuba and the U.S. Cuba was totally isolated from the U.S. It used to be illegal to come here. If you're an American, you came here for almost any purpose and you didn't have a specific license, you could look at a fine, you could have your passport taken away. At least that's what the U.S. government threatened. And now it's gotten a lot easier now that Cuba and the United States are changing the relationship. There's a normalization process going on. So this is something that hasn't happened for most of Cubans' lifetimes, that a flight from the U.S. comes here, lands here, people get off. There'll be a JetBlue office opening here today, and you know that is really incredible. Is there a lot of crime there? I find Cuba very safe. It is a police state, for lack of a better term. There are police everywhere. There are not a lot of drugs. There are not a lot of guns. So I think it's one of the safest destinations in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and there just isn't a culture of violence that you see in other places because there are very little drugs, there are very little guns. The government goes after those things and puts people away for long prison sentences if they commit those crimes. And people have a sense here that it's a bad idea to commit a crime against a tourist in particular. So we've got time for just a couple more. How much longer until landing? This is a crazy thing. The plane is taking off now. It will land in just under an hour. That is how close Cuba is from the United States. Flights from Havana to Havana from Miami take about 45 minutes. You go up and you go down. It's literally next door. What's the currency there? Cuba has two currencies, the CUC and the CUP. They do not accept dollars. The CUC, which is the money that most people, most tourists will use here, the CUC, is about equal to the dollar. None of these currencies are worth anything outside of Cuba. Keep that in mind. Spend it all here. Change it when you leave. Because it's just not worth anything outside of Cuba, but it's the money that they accept here. How many flights are coming in a day? Today's the first flight. Next week we will have 2 flights from American Airlines. There could be up to 110 flights a day from the United States. That is enormous. We wonder if there's the capacity here for it, if the airports are ready for it here. We'll find out soon enough. But certainly the Cuban government wants this tourism money to come in. They need it very badly, and they are welcoming just about all the flights they can to some outdated airports that need to be renovated now. And will that number change? It seems right now that until they can fix up the airports, make the airports much bigger, that the number of American tourists will be limited. And as well, there still are regulations. There still is a travel ban from the U.S. to Cuba. And until the embargo is lifted, until the travel ban is lifted, a lot of Americans will think, excuse me, that they do not want to risk coming here once the travel ban, once the embargo is gone, which is being studied. There are certainly more and more proponents for it. Once that does go away, I think people will be flooded. Again, remember, before the revolution, this was an island that was awash in American tourists. And now we're going to do our last question. What is the biggest worry from people who live there? I think in general, people are very concerned about the economy here. Most people here do not make a living wage if they work for the government, which is the majority of the country. There are some concerns about how tourism will be managed, how it will trickle down to the Cuban people. The Cuban government controls the economy here, and they are, of course, going to see a lot of the benefits of this increased tourism. But it is trickling in to Cubans because you can rent Cubans' homes, you can rent cars for them, you can go to their restaurants, and often those are the best places to stay. Those are the best places to eat. I recommend that you stay with a Cuban family, that you eat at their house, because you will just receive a treatment like you are their family. So that is where we're going to end it. It's been great talking to you from Santa Clara. It is rare because of the restrictions we face to be able to broadcast from a location outside of Havana. And in about an hour, JetBlue Flight 387 will land here in Santa Clara, and a little bit of history will be made. I'm Patrick Ottman in Santa Clara, Cuba. Vamos.